A simple woman was treated like trash when she walked into a luxury car dealership, but the mistake made by the person who humiliated her was much greater than it seemed at that moment. Her husband watched everything in silence without saying a single word. What he did afterward completely changed the fate of that place. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching us from. Continuing, the Saturday afternoon sun bathed Fifth Avenue in that characteristic golden light of New York City in late October. Sarah held Robert's hand as they walked along the wide sidewalk, observing the store windows that followed one after another. She wore faded jeans, a white cotton blouse that had already seen many washes, and a pair of comfortable sneakers she had been wearing for over 2 years. Robert was equally simple, in a navy blue polo shirt and khaki pants, his hair slightly tousled by the wind blowing between the skyscrapers. There was nothing wrong with their simplicity. Sarah worked as a teacher at a public school in Queens, waking up every day at 5 in the morning to take 2 trains to get to work. Robert was an industrial equipment maintenance technician, always with grease-stained hands, always with that calm smile that won her over 7 years ago when they met at a summer street fair in her neighborhood. They lived in a rented 2-bedroom apartment in Jamaica, Queens, split the bills carefully, shopped at the grocery store comparing prices and planned every dollar they earned. It was an honest, dignified life, built with hard work and true love. But on that Saturday, Sarah had a different spark in her eyes. Since she was a child, she had always been passionate about cars. She remembered her father, who worked as a bus driver, coming home late at night and telling stories about the different vehicles he saw on the streets. He used to stop with her in front of dealerships, pointing to the most beautiful models, saying that one day she would have her dream car. Her father passed away 5 years ago, taken by an illness that didn't give him time to fight. But the love for cars remained alive within her like a flame that never completely went out. Robert knew this. He knew every detail of his wife's silent passion, so when she mentioned she just wanted to look closely at a specific model she had seen in an advertisement, he didn't hesitate. They didn't have the money to buy it, that was clear to both. But dreaming cost nothing. To look, to admire, to touch the shiny bodywork with her fingers, to feel for a few minutes what it would be like to be inside that universe. That was all she wanted. A moment of connection with her father's memory, with those days when they stood on the sidewalk, looking through the dealership windows. Elite Motors was located on a prime corner, entirely covered in mirrored glass, with imported cars displayed like rare jewels. Sarah felt her heart race as they reached the entrance. Robert squeezed her hand affectionately, and she smiled, taking a deep breath before pushing the glass door. The interior environment was impressive. Polished marble floors reflected the indirect lights coming from the high ceiling. There was a reception desk made of dark wood, leather sofas strategically arranged, and of course, the cars. Beautiful, impeccable, each positioned like a work of art. Sarah felt a mixture of enchantment and intimidation. It wasn't a place made for people like her. That became clear from the first second. The stares began immediately. A woman in high heels and an impeccable suit passing by with a folder in her hand cast a quick, evaluative look, loaded with silent judgment. A man in a suit was talking on the phone near one of the cars and averted his eyes when Sarah passed, as if her presence were a visual nuisance. She tried to ignore it, focusing on the car she had come to see. A silver sedan, elegant, with smooth lines and headlights that looked like watchful eyes. That was when the employee approached. Julian was the name embroidered on his impeccable white shirt. He was around 35 years old, with gelled hair slicked back and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He stopped at a studied distance, crossed his arms and tilted his head slightly, evaluating the couple from head to toe with purposeful slowness. "Good morning," Sarah said, trying to sound confident. Her voice came out weaker than she intended. Julian didn't respond immediately. He just let the silence drag on for a few awkward seconds before speaking. "Can I help you?" The tone wasn't one of help. It was suspicion disguised as politeness. Sarah felt the discomfort crawl up her spine, but she forced a smile. "We'd like to see this model here, just to take a look if possible." Julian looked at the car, then back at her, and let out a short, almost inaudible laugh. "This model here?" He paused dramatically, as if pondering. "Look, this car isn't exactly for just any profile, you understand? It's a considerable investment. Are you sure you want to spend time looking at something like this?" Sarah felt her face burn. Robert beside her tensed up but remained silent. She insisted, trying to maintain her composure. "We just want to look. We aren't bothering anyone." Julian sighed as if he were doing an enormous favor. "Look, I'll be honest with you. We get a lot of people in here who just come to take photos, post on social media, you know, pretending to have a life they don't. It's not personal, but we need to focus on real clients, understand?" That was like a punch to the stomach. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but the words didn't come out. She felt her eyes sting and her throat tighten. Julian continued, now with an even more condescending tone. "There are more accessible dealerships out in Queens. Maybe that's more your profile. Here we work with a specific audience." That was when Robert finally moved. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't make a scene, but there was something different in his eyes, a coldness that Sarah had never seen before. He took a step forward, positioning himself slightly in front of his wife, like a silent shield. "I understand," Robert said, his voice calm but loaded with something Sarah couldn't identify. "Thank you for your honesty." Julian seemed satisfied, as if he had fulfilled his mission to drive away the unwanted. "No problem. Have a good day." Sarah turned to leave, but before she could take the first step, she heard muffled laughter coming from a group of salesmen watching the scene from afar. One of them commented quietly, but loud enough for her to hear, "You wouldn't believe the people who show up here." The humiliation was complete. Sarah felt the tears rise, hot and uncontrollable. She crossed the store with quick steps, pushed the glass door, and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The fresh New York air hit her face, but it brought no relief. She leaned against the wall of the building next door, covered her face with her hands, and let the tears fall freely. Robert came out right behind her. He didn't say anything immediately. He just wrapped his arms around her, letting her break down right there on Fifth Avenue while people rushed past, indifferent to the pain that was overflowing. "I just wanted to look," Sarah whispered between sobs. "I just wanted to see it up close. I didn't do anything wrong." "I know, honey, I know." She pulled away a bit, wiping her face with her hands. "Why are people like that? Why did they look at me like I was worth nothing?" Robert held her face with both hands, forcing her to look into his eyes. "You are worth everything, everything, and I'm going to prove it." There was something in his voice, something Sarah didn't recognize, a determination that went beyond consolation, a firmness that seemed rehearsed, as if he knew exactly what to do next. She frowned, confused, but before she could ask, Robert was already taking his phone out of his pocket. "Wait here a second," he said, stepping a few paces away. Sarah watched as her husband made a call. His posture changed completely. His shoulders squared, his voice gained a tone of command she had never heard before. He spoke quietly, but there was authority in every word. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but she saw the transformation happening before her eyes. That wasn't the Robert she knew. It wasn't the maintenance technician who came home with grease-stained hands. It was someone different, someone who seemed accustomed to giving orders, to being heard, to having power. When he hung up and returned to her, Sarah felt an uneasiness grow in her chest. "Rob, who were you talking to?" He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then smiled, a smile that tried to be reassuring but carried shadows. "I'll explain later. For now, let's go home." On the way back, inside the crowded subway, Sarah couldn't stop thinking. She watched Robert sitting beside her, looking out the window as the stations passed. Details she had previously ignored now stood out. The way he always had money saved for emergencies, but never explained where it came from. The calls he answered and stepped away to talk. The excessive calmness in situations that should have made him nervous. The evasive answers every time she asked about his family, who he said lived in another state and they didn't have much contact. How many times had she accepted those answers without questioning? How many times had she ignored the signs because she was too busy with her own life, with work, with bills, with the routine that consumed all her energy? When they arrived at the apartment, it was already night. Sarah dropped her bag on the sofa and turned to Robert. "I need you to tell me the truth." He stopped at the kitchen door, his back to her. He stayed like that for a long moment in silence, as if he were making a decision he had been postponing for a long time. When he finally turned around, there were tears in his eyes. "Sarah, I never wanted to lie to you. Then tell me who you really are." And it was at that moment, in that simple living room of an apartment in Jamaica, Queens, that Robert began to tell the truth that would change everything. The truth that had been hidden for 7 years. The truth he had sworn to himself he would never reveal, but that he could no longer hold back. "My full name is Robert Sterling Harrison. My family owns one of the largest corporate holdings in the United States." The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't yet fully exploded. Sarah blinked several times, trying to process what she had just heard. Robert Sterling Harrison. The last name echoed in her mind, familiar from some distant place, from news she might have seen passing quickly on television, from massive signs on office buildings in Midtown Manhattan. Harrison, the Harrison Group, one of the largest corporate holdings in the country. She took a step back, as if she needed physical distance to absorb the information. "You're joking with me." Robert shook his head slowly, his eyes fixed on her, loaded with an old pain. "I've never been more serious in my life." Sarah's legs weakened, and she let herself fall onto the sofa. The room around her seemed the same as ever. The walls with that faded paint they always said they were going to redo. The old television resting on a simple wooden stand. The curtains she had sewn herself because they didn't have the money to buy ready-made ones. Everything was real, tangible, true. But suddenly, nothing made sense. 7 years, she whispered, her voice trembling. 7 years, Robert. We split the electric bill, we saved coins to buy bread. I saw you come home tired, with dirty clothes, with bruised hands. You work. I see you work every day. I do work, he confirmed, approaching slowly and kneeling in front of her. But not because I need the money. I work because I wanted to have a real life. I wanted to be someone beyond the last name, beyond the bank account, beyond the expectations. Sarah covered her face with her hands. Her head throbbed, her heart beat erratically. How many times did you see me worried about money? How many times did I stay up late grading papers because I needed every cent of my salary? And you knew you could solve everything with one phone call. It wasn't about solving it, Sarah. It never was. It was about being with you for real. Without interests, without masks, without anything that could contaminate what we had. She pulled her hands away from her face and stared at him. Her eyes shone with tears, but also with anger. And you think this isn't a mask? Hiding who you really are for 7 years? Making me believe in a life that didn't exist? The life exists, Robert insisted, his voice breaking. The love exists. Everything we lived together was true. I only hid what didn't matter. It didn't matter. Sarah stood up abruptly, making Robert recoil. Maybe it didn't matter to you, but to me? You took away my right to decide if I wanted to be with someone like that. You took away my right to know who I was marrying. Robert stood up too, his hands trembling. I was afraid. Afraid that you would look at me differently. Afraid that the money would change everything. Because it always changes, Sarah. Always. She felt the tears roll down her face, hot and abundant. For 7 years she had loved that man. She woke up beside him every day, shared dreams, fears, plans. They had gone through difficulties together, celebrated small victories, consoled each other on bad nights. And now she discovered that half of that story was built on a massive omission. Tell me everything, she demanded, her voice firm despite the tears. From the beginning, who you really are. Robert took a deep breath and began. The Harrison family had a fortune built over 4 generations. It started with his great-grandfather, who founded a small textile factory in New England and expanded into other sectors. Over time, the group grew, diversified, and became an empire that encompassed construction, technology, energy, and telecommunications. Robert's grandfather multiplied the fortune, and his father consolidated the power. Robert was the only son, the natural heir. He grew up in mansions, studied at the best private schools in New York, and traveled the entire world before he was 20. He had everything money could buy, but he also carried the crushing weight of expectations. Since he was a child, he was molded to take command of the empire. There was no room for his own desires, for personal dreams. He was a piece on a giant chessboard, moved according to strategies defined by others. At 25, he rebelled. Tired of living a life he hadn't chosen, of being surrounded by people who only saw him as a source of benefits, of never knowing if he was loved for who he was or for what he had, Robert made a radical decision. He left home, cut contact with most of his family, assumed a different identity, and went to live as an ordinary person. "I didn't abandon it completely," he explained. "I still have a stake in the companies. I still receive reports. I still make some important decisions when necessary. But from afar, without appearing, without the spotlight, my uncle took over daily management. I just wanted the chance to live." "And the maintenance technician job?" Sarah asked, her voice calmer now, but still loaded with pain. "It's real. I studied mechanical engineering because I always liked it. The work gives me purpose. It makes me feel useful in a way that sitting in a boardroom discussing mergers and acquisitions never did." Sarah walked to the window, looking at the dark street below. Streetlights illuminated the sidewalk, where children were still playing despite the hour. Cars passed slowly, loud music leaking through open windows. It was her world. Simple, real, honest. "When you met me," she continued without turning around, "did you already know you were going to hide this from me?" "I didn't plan to meet you," Robert responded, approaching from behind but keeping his distance. "At that block party, I just wanted to dance, talk, be treated like a normal person. And then you appeared, beautiful, intelligent, genuine. You looked at me and didn't see dollar signs, you didn't see opportunities, you just saw me. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly seen. You could have told me later, when you realized it was getting serious between us. I should have told you," he admitted, his voice full of regret. "But the more time passed, the harder it became. I was so afraid of losing you, and now look, I'm losing you anyway." Sarah turned to face him. Her eyes were red, her face marked by tears, but there was something beyond pain in that gaze. There was confusion, betrayal, but also a flicker of understanding. "Do you love me?" "More than anything in this life," Robert answered without hesitation. "Then why today? Why did you decide to reveal it specifically today?" Robert sighed heavily. "Because when I saw you being humiliated in that store, when I saw the tears on your face, when I felt the pain those people caused you, I realized I couldn't stand by anymore. I couldn't keep hiding who I am if it meant letting you suffer without reacting." "And what do you intend to do?" Sarah asked, feeling a strange mixture of fear and curiosity. "I'm going to transform that company. I'm going to buy it, restructure it, and completely change the culture that allows people like you to be treated that way. Because it's not just about today, Sarah. It's about all the other people who walked into that store and were judged by their appearance, by the way they talk, by the neighborhood they live in." Sarah felt something move inside her, a spark of something she couldn't completely name. It wasn't just about revenge or justice. It was about dignity, about proving that no one had the right to make another person feel small. "I am angry at you," she said, her voice firm. "I'm hurt, confused, and I don't know if I'll be able to trust you again anytime soon. But I also know that the man who consoled me outside, who held my hand, who stood by my side, that man is real, no matter how much money he has." Robert took a step forward, hesitant. "Sarah—" "But I need time," she finished. "I need to process all of this. I need to understand who you really are, not the version you showed me, not the version your family wants you to be. I need to know the whole Robert." He nodded, respecting her space. "I'll show you everything. No more secrets, no more lies, but first let me show you something." "What?" "A world that was always yours by right. You just didn't know it." In the following days, Robert took Sarah to places she had never imagined visiting. It began at the headquarters of Harrison Holdings, a 30-story mirrored building in Midtown. When they entered the marble lobby, the security guards gave a discreet bow. In the private elevator, Sarah watched Robert press the button for the top floor with a familiarity that revealed how many times he had done it before. The office at the top of the building was immense. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of New York City. Sarah could see the entire city stretching as far as the eye could reach, a sea of buildings, houses, and lives happening simultaneously. An impeccably dressed man in a suit approached. "Mr. Harrison, what an honor to have you here. It's been months since you came in person." Robert shook his hand. "Marcus, this is my wife, Sarah." The man's eyes widened in surprise, but he quickly composed himself and greeted Sarah with respect. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Harrison." Mrs. Harrison. The title sounded strange in her ears. Throughout the day, Sarah was introduced to executives, directors, and shareholders. Everyone treated Robert with a deference that bordered on reverence, and she, by association, received the same treatment. But Sarah noticed something beyond respect. There was calculation in their gazes, veiled interest in the apparently casual questions about how they met and how long they had been together. At night, emotionally exhausted, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed in the five-star hotel room, where Robert had insisted they stay. "Is it always like this?" she asked. "What?" "The people, the way they look at you, like you're a walking opportunity." Robert sat down beside her. "It's always been like that, that's why I ran away." Sarah looked at her own hands, teacher's hands, calloused from holding chalk, from carrying stacks of notebooks, hands that knew hard work, real effort. And now, suddenly, she was in a world where people bowed, where her last name opened doors that were previously insurmountable walls. "I don't know if I belong to this," she confessed. Robert held her hand. "You don't belong to this. You belong to yourself. You always have. And that's exactly what I want to prove to those people who humiliated you. That dignity isn't bought, isn't worn, isn't driven. It's something you've always had, with or without money." And it was at that moment, in that hotel room, that Sarah felt something change inside her. The anger was still there, the hurt too. But along with those feelings, a new determination was being born. A desire to go back to that dealership, not for revenge, but to prove something. For herself and for all the people who had one day been judged by their appearance. "Then show me how we do this," she said, looking into Robert's eyes. "Show me how we transform that place." Robert smiled, a true smile full of hope. "Tomorrow we start." Morning arrived with a clear sky over New York. Sarah woke up disoriented for a few seconds, until she realized she wasn't in the apartment in Jamaica. The sheets were of a softness she had never felt before. The mattress seemed to hug her in a way that made it hard to want to get up. She turned her head and saw Robert already awake, sitting in an armchair near the window, watching the city below with a cup of coffee in his hands. He noticed she was awake and smiled. "Good morning, sleep well?" Sarah sat up in bed, pulling the sheets to cover herself. "I did, I think. I'm still trying to believe all of this is real." Robert placed the cup on the side table and approached, sitting on the edge of the bed. "It's real, and today I want to show you a bit more, if you want, of course." She hesitated. Part of her wanted to go back home, to the reality she knew, where things made sense. But another part, a part that had been growing since the night before, felt curiosity. She wanted to fully understand what world she had entered without knowing. "All right, show me." After breakfast, which was served in the room with a variety of options that left Sarah not knowing where to start, Robert took her to a place she never imagined visiting, an exclusive shopping district in Soho, where the stores didn't have flashy signs, just discreet names engraved on polished metal plates. They entered a clothing boutique. There were no overcrowded shelves or full racks, just selected pieces displayed like works of art, spaced so that each had its own highlight. An elegant middle-aged woman approached with a genuine smile. "Mr. Harrison, what a pleasure to have you here again, and this must be Mrs. Harrison. It's an honor to meet you." Sarah was taken aback by the kindness. There was no judgment in that woman's eyes, only professionalism and cordiality. Robert explained that they needed some clothes for Sarah, something suitable for corporate events, but that respected her personal style. What happened in the following hours was a completely new experience. The consultant didn't try to turn her into someone else. Instead, she asked questions about what Sarah liked, what colors made her feel good, what kind of clothes made her comfortable. She was patient, attentive, and respectful. When Sarah stepped out of the fitting room wearing a navy blue pantsuit, she stopped in front of the mirror and almost didn't recognize herself. It wasn't the clothes themselves, but the way she held herself. Her shoulders were straighter, her chin slightly raised. She looked confident, powerful, and that scared her a little. Robert appeared behind her in the mirror's reflection. "You look beautiful, but more importantly, are you comfortable?" Sarah touched the fabric of the blazer. It was soft, it breathed well, it moved with her instead of against her. I am. It's strange to say this, but I am. After the boutique, Robert took her to the most renowned hair salon in the city. Not out of vanity, he explained, but because he wanted her to feel good about herself. He wanted that when they returned to the dealership, Sarah would be confident not because of the clothes or the haircut, but because she knew she deserved to be anywhere she chose to be. At the salon, an entire team dedicated themselves to her. They didn't change who she was, they only enhanced her. Her hair was cut to flatter her face, her makeup was subtle but transformative. When it was finished, Sarah looked in the mirror and saw something different. It wasn't someone else, it was herself, only seen through a lens that highlighted qualities that had always been there. In the afternoon, Robert took her to see his real work. Not the maintenance technician disguise, but what he did behind the scenes. In a boardroom at the top of the Harrison Holdings building, Sarah watched as he discussed strategies with a group of executives. They talked about acquisitions, investments, and social impact. It was when the name Elite Motors appeared in the conversation that Sarah paid full attention. Marcus, the executive they had met the day before, presented a detailed report on the dealership. The numbers weren't good. Sales were falling, employee turnover was high, and there were frequent customer complaints about inadequate treatment. The company was vulnerable. Mr. Harrison, Marcus said, it's an acquisition that makes sense from a strategic point of view. They have good contracts with manufacturers, a prime location, and growth potential. But the current management is dragging the business down. With the right restructuring, we can transform it completely. Robert looked at Sarah, who was sitting in silence beside him. What do you think? Everyone in the room turned to her, surprised. Sarah felt her heart race, but she kept her voice firm. I think it's not just about numbers, it's about people. If the company culture allows employees to treat customers that way, the problem is deeper than financial management. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. You're right. We need a cultural transformation, not just an operational one. Robert smiled discreetly, proud. Then that's what we're going to do, Marcus, start the acquisition process. But before we close, I want a full report on all employees, history, evaluations, complaints, everything. After the meeting, as they walked down the empty corridor, Sarah asked, Why did you ask my opinion in there? Because your opinion matters. It always has. And because you saw that place from an angle that none of these executives ever will. You felt what it's like to be judged, despised. That perspective is worth more than any market analysis. Sarah stopped walking and looked at him. Are you really going to buy the company? I am, but not to destroy it, to rebuild it, to transform it into a place where people like you are treated with the dignity they deserve. In the days that followed, Sarah saw Robert work tirelessly. He coordinated teams, reviewed contracts, and analyzed documents. But he also included her in everything. He asked for opinions, listened to suggestions, and treated her as a partner in every decision. And gradually, Sarah began to feel like a part of it. One night back at the apartment in Jamaica, which now felt small but familiar, Sarah sat beside Robert on the sofa. I'm still angry at you for hiding all this, she said. But I'm also starting to understand why. Robert took her hand. I should have told you sooner. I should have trusted that you would love me anyway. I would have, Sarah confirmed. Maybe not at first, maybe I would have been afraid, intimidated. But with time I would have. Because what I love about you has nothing to do with money or power. He leaned his forehead against hers. Thank you for giving me a chance to prove that. But now you have to promise me one thing, Sarah continued, pulling back to look into his eyes. When we go back to that dealership, I don't want it to be about revenge. I don't want to humiliate anyone. I want it to be about real change. Robert nodded. Real change, I promise. The following week was one of intense preparation. The acquisition of Elite Motors was underway, but there were legal, contractual, and financial issues to be resolved. Meanwhile, Robert assembled a team specialized in organizational transformation. People who understood corporate culture, training, and human development. Sarah, for her part, went back to work at the school. But something had changed in her. It wasn't the clothes, which now included more elegant pieces mixed with her old ones. It wasn't the hair, which she kept in the new cut because she liked how she felt. It was her posture, The way she walked into the classroom, how she spoke to the students, how she positioned herself in meetings with the administration. A colleague commented, "Sarah, you look different. Did something happen?" Sarah smiled. "I'm just discovering myself, that's all." And it was true. For the first time in her life, Sarah was seeing herself not through the eyes of others, but through her own. And what she saw was someone strong, capable, and worthy of respect. She always had been. She just hadn't realized it. 2 weeks after the incident at the dealership, Robert came home with news. The acquisition was approved. Elite Motors is now ours. Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. Ours? Ours. I put half the shares in your name. You're a co-owner. She was speechless. Robert, I don't know anything about running a company. You don't need to know everything. You'll learn. And you'll bring something that no MBA teaches, real empathy. You know what it's like to be on the other side of the counter. That's worth more than any management technique. Sarah took a deep breath. She was scared, but she was also excited. When do we go back there? Tomorrow. The current owner, Mr. Henry, will be there. He needs to sign the transfer papers. I thought it appropriate that he see us in person. How should we dress? Sarah asked. Robert smiled. However you want, but I have a suggestion. The next day, Sarah woke up early. She went to the closet and looked at the clothes. There were the new ones, elegant, expensive, and there were the old ones, simple, comfortable. She thought for a long moment before making a decision. When she stepped out of the room, Robert saw her and understood immediately. She was wearing the navy blue blazer they had bought, but combined with the faded jeans she had worn on the day of the humiliation. The sneakers were the same old, comfortable ones. Her hair was in the new cut, but without elaborate makeup. It was a perfect mix of who she had always been and who she was becoming. Perfect, said Robert, who had also chosen something between formal and casual. On the way to Fifth Avenue, Sarah felt her heart beating fast. It wasn't exactly nervousness, it was anticipation. Something was about to be completed. A cycle that had begun with pain was about to close in a way she could never have predicted. When the car stopped in front of Elite Motors, Sarah took a deep breath. Robert held her hand. Ready? She looked at the mirrored glass facade. Inside, in that same space where she had been humiliated, she was about to enter again. But this time it was different. Not because she had money now, but because she finally understood her own worth. Ready, she answered, squeezing Robert's hand. And together, side by side, they pushed the glass door and walked in. The glass door opened with the same soft sound as 2 weeks ago, but everything felt different. Sarah crossed the entrance beside Robert, and this time the looks that turned toward them carried something beyond judgment. There was curiosity, perhaps some instinctive recognition that these two people were not ordinary, even if they didn't yet know exactly why. The marble floor reflected the same indirect light. The cars remained on display like works of art, but something in the air had changed, or perhaps it was just Sarah's perception that was different. She no longer felt small in that space. She didn't feel out of place. She walked with her spine straight, her steps firm, conscious that she deserved to be there as much as anyone else. A young salesman approached quickly, a professional smile plastered on his face. "Good morning, welcome to Elite Motors. How can I help you?" Sarah looked at him and saw no malice, just an employee trying to do his job. "We're here for a meeting with Mr. Henry." The salesman blinked, surprised. "Oh yes, of course, I'll let him know you've arrived. May I have your names?" "Robert Sterling Harrison," Robert replied, his voice calm but loaded with natural authority. "And this is my wife, Sarah." The name caused a visible impact. The salesman went pale for a second, then recomposed himself and dashed toward the back of the store. Sarah watched as he spoke to someone on the phone, gesturing nervously. That was when she saw him. Julian. He was near one of the cars, talking to a well-dressed couple, laughing at something he had said. For a moment, Sarah felt her stomach contract, the memory of the humiliation returning like a wave. But she took a deep breath, remembering who she was now. Not the clothes she wore, not the money she had access to, but the woman she had always been, and who was finally recognizing her own value. Julian hadn't seen them yet. He continued with that arrogant smile, that posture of someone who thought himself superior to others. Sarah wondered how many other people he had treated that way, how many others had left there with tears in their eyes, feeling unworthy. Mr. Henry appeared from an office in the back. He was a man of about 60, with grey hair slicked back and an impeccable grey suit. There was something tired in his eyes, like someone carrying the weight of difficult decisions. He approached with measured steps, his hand extended. "Mr. Harrison, what an honor to receive you in person. I'm Henry Sterling, the current owner of Elite Motors, and this must be Mrs. Harrison." Sarah shook his hand. "Pleasure to meet you." Henry gestured toward the conference room. "Please, let's talk with more privacy." But before they could move, Julian finally looked in their direction. Sarah saw the exact moment recognition happened. His eyes widened, the color drained from his face. He took an involuntary step back, as if he had been hit by an invisible punch. Robert noticed too and stopped. "Actually, Mr. Henry, before we go to the room, I'd like to take a look at the vehicles. After all, that's what we came for the first time." Henry seemed confused but nodded. "Of course, feel free. I can ask one of the salesmen to assist you." "No need," Sarah said, her voice firm and clear. "I think that gentleman over there has already assisted us before." She pointed to Julian, who seemed frozen in place. The silence that followed was heavy. Other salesmen and customers began to realize something was happening. Julian swallowed hard and approached slowly, like someone walking to their own judgment. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice coming out shaky. "Can I help you?" Robert took a step forward, placing himself between Sarah and Julian. "Don't you recognize us?" Julian opened and closed his mouth a few times. He looked at Sarah, then at Robert, and Sarah saw the exact moment the memory clicked. Panic took over his face. I... 2 weeks ago," Robert continued, his voice calm but cutting, "my wife and I walked into this store. We just wanted to look at a car. We didn't ask for anything beyond basic respect. And do you know what we received?" Julian was visibly trembling now. "Sir, We received contempt," Sarah interrupted, finding her own voice. "Judgmental looks, muffled laughter, words that made it very clear that, in your view, we didn't belong in this place. Do you remember that?" Henry, who was watching the scene with growing horror, took a step forward. "Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Harrison, please tell me this isn't true." "It is true," Robert confirmed, but without taking his eyes off Julian. "And it wasn't an isolated case, I'm sure." Julian finally found words, but they came out scrambled, desperate. "I didn't know who you were. If I had known, I never would have—" "And that is exactly the problem," Sarah cut in, feeling a strength grow within her. "You would only have treated us with respect if you knew who we were. That isn't respect. It's calculation. It's interest. Real respect doesn't depend on a last name or a bank account." The entire room was in silence now. All the salesmen, all the customers stopped what they were doing to watch. Sarah felt dozens of eyes on her, but she didn't back down. Not this time. Henry covered his face with his hands for a moment, then looked at Julian with a mixture of disappointment and anger. "How many times did I say that this kind of behavior would not be tolerated here? How many times?" Julian was white as a sheet. "Mr. Henry, I can explain." "There is no explanation that justifies treating any person that way," Henry said, his voice heavy. He turned to Robert and Sarah. "I offer 1,000 apologies on behalf of the company. This is unacceptable and—" Henry stopped talking when Robert raised his hand. "Mr. Henry, are you aware of the financial problems Elite Motors has been facing over the last 2 years?" The question caught the man by surprise. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I am. It's no secret we're going through difficulties." "And are you aware of the number of complaints registered against this store for inadequate service?" Henry went even paler. "I heard comments, but—" "They aren't just comments," Robert interrupted. "Marcus, please." A man Sarah hadn't noticed before stepped out from behind a pillar. It was Marcus, the executive from Harrison Holdings. He carried a folder and opened it, pulling out several documents. In Marcus's hands were printouts of online complaints, emails from dissatisfied customers, and records of unresolved problems. He began to read aloud. Customer reporting prejudiced treatment for being young. Customer of Asian descent reporting inappropriate comments. Customer with a disability complaining about lack of accessibility and disrespect. And the list goes on. Each word was like a stone falling into a silent lake. Henry listened with an increasingly shattered expression. Sarah saw tears forming in the man's eyes. "I didn't know it was that bad," Henry murmured. "I failed. As an owner, as a manager, I failed completely. Robert watched the man for a long moment before speaking. "Henry, I came here not just to buy your company. I came to offer an opportunity for transformation. But I need to know, are you genuinely sorry, or just afraid of the consequences?" Henry looked directly at Sarah. "Mrs. Harrison, look into my eyes. I am genuinely ashamed. I built this company with my own hands 30 years ago. I started as a mechanic, then a salesman, then a manager. I know what it's like to be looked down on for not having a degree, for having grease-stained hands. I swore my company would be different, and somewhere along the way I lost sight of that. I let the pressure of numbers, of competition, make me close my eyes to what really matters." The tears were now running freely down his face. "I have no excuses, only deep regret." Sarah felt something move inside her. It wasn't exactly pity, but understanding. Henry wasn't a villain, he was someone who got lost, who let circumstances change who he was. "So here is what's going to happen," Robert said. "The acquisition of Elite Motors by Harrison Holdings will be finalized, but with conditions. Henry, you will remain as a consultant for 1 year, helping with the transition, but management will be completely renewed." He turned to Julian, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the marble floor. "As for you, you have 2 options. You can leave now with a basic severance, or you can stay, go through an intensive training program on service, empathy, and respect, and prove that you can truly change. The choice is yours." Julian looked at Sarah, his eyes full of tears. "I can change, I swear I can. I don't want to be this person. I was just trying to impress, trying to seem important. But I ended up becoming exactly the kind of person I looked down on when I was younger." "Then prove it," Sarah said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "Not for us, but for every next person who walks through that door. Prove that dignity has no price, that respect cannot be bought." Julian nodded vigorously, unable to speak. Robert looked around the store at all the salesmen watching in silence. "And that goes for everyone here. This company is going to change. We will implement training, create clear policies, and establish a culture of genuine respect. Those who want to be part of this transformation are welcome. Those who prefer to continue judging people by their appearance can look for somewhere else to work." Henry extended his hand to Robert, then to Sarah. "Thank you. Thank you for not simply destroying what took me so long to build. Thank you for the chance to do the right thing." Sarah shook his hand and saw sincerity in the man's tired eyes. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Mr. Henry, including you." When they left Elite Motors that afternoon, Sarah felt different. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't revenge fulfilled. It was something deeper, more significant. It was the feeling that somehow the pain she felt 2 weeks ago had been transformed into something greater, into an opportunity for real change, not just for her, but for all the people who would walk into that store in the future. Robert held her hand as they walked down Fifth Avenue. "You were incredible in there." Sarah smiled. "I was so afraid to go back. But when I finally faced it, I realized that the person who left here crying wasn't weak. She was human. And the difference now isn't that I got stronger. It's that I finally understood that I always was. And that," Robert said, pulling her into a hug right there on the busy sidewalk, "is the most important transformation of all." The following 3 months were ones of intense transformation. Sarah split her time between work at the school and regular visits to Elite Motors, where she followed every step of the restructuring. Robert had kept his word. It wasn't just an administrative change, but a complete cultural revolution. The first measure was to hire a company specialized in human development. Every employee, without exception, went through a 2-week training program. These weren't just theoretical classes on customer service. They were experiences, dynamics, deep conversations about empathy, respect, and unconscious bias. Julian was one of the first to participate. Sarah made a point of being present on the first day. When he saw her enter the training room, he was visibly uncomfortable, but he didn't look away. She sat at the back, just observing. The training facilitator, a psychologist named Margaret with over 20 years of experience, began with a simple but powerful activity. She asked each employee to introduce themselves and tell a story about a time they felt unfairly judged. There was a long silence before anyone spoke up. Then a young saleswoman timidly raised her hand. "My name is Chloe. When I started here, I was 19. One day, A customer asked if there wasn't someone more experienced to help him, as if my age made me incompetent before I even opened my mouth. Others began to share. A black mechanic told of customers who asked to speak to another professional, doubting his ability. A receptionist with a southern accent reported offensive jokes about her origins. Julian remained quiet for most of the session, his face increasingly tense. When he finally spoke, his voice was choked. I grew up in the outskirts of Newark. My mother worked as a maid. My father was a construction worker. When I got this job here, I thought I had made it. I was surrounded by luxury cars, rich customers, money, and I wanted so much to be part of that world that I started acting how I thought people in that world acted. I started judging, looking down on others, treating people the way I had been treated my whole life. He looked directly at Sarah, and I became exactly the kind of person who always made me feel small. Margaret let the silence settle before speaking. Recognizing it is the first step, Julian, but recognizing it doesn't erase what was done. What you do now is what really matters. In the following days, the training deepened. Real cases of customers who had complained were presented, not to humiliate the responsible employees, but so they could understand the impact of their actions. Sarah saw tears, saw genuine shame, and also saw resistance in some. An older salesman stood up in the middle of a session. With all due respect, we work with luxury products. It's natural that not everyone who walks in here is our target audience. Margaret was not intimidated. And how do you identify who your target audience is? By their clothes? By the car they arrived in? By their address? She paused. We have an exercise for you. Next week, I want you to assist every customer who walks in here with the same level of attention and respect, regardless of appearance. And afterward, tell me how many opportunities you lost by judging before you knew them. Henry, who participated in every session even without being obligated, also had his moments of confrontation. In a dynamic about responsible leadership, he was questioned about how he allowed the company culture to deteriorate so much. I got lost in the numbers, he admitted, his voice loaded with emotion. I became so obsessed with sales goals, with competing with other dealerships, that I stopped paying attention to what really mattered. And when I received complaints, I thought they were isolated cases, exceptions. I never wanted to see that there was a pattern. Sarah intervened at that moment, standing up from the back of the room. Henry, can I ask a question? He turned to her, surprised but attentive. Of course, Mrs. Harrison. Please call me Sarah, she approached. When you were a mechanic, as you said you were, how did you feel when you were treated differently because of your profession? Henry's eyes filled with tears. I felt invisible, as if my work had no value, as if I had no value. And at what point did you forget that feeling? Henry lowered his head. When I started to move up, when I started to have more, I wanted so much not to feel that way anymore that I ended up distancing myself from who I was. As if pretending I was never that person made me better, but it only made me worse. Sarah placed her hand on his shoulder. We don't grow by forgetting where we came from. We grow by remembering and doing things differently. While the training took place, physical changes were also implemented at the dealership. Robert hired accessibility consultants to ensure that people with disabilities could move freely. They installed ramps where there were only steps, adapted bathrooms, and added braille signage. Sarah suggested something that initially caused resistance, creating a children's area inside the store. Many customers came with children and were worried about keeping them quiet while looking at cars. The space with toys and books not only solved the problem, but made the experience more welcoming for entire families. The biggest change, however, came in the service policy. A simple but powerful rule was created. Every customer who entered the store should receive the same quality of service, regardless of appearance or demonstration of immediate purchase interest. Salespeople who prioritized customers based on visual judgments would receive progressive warnings. To ensure this was followed, Sarah had a bold idea. Once a week, she or Robert would visit the store dressed simply, without identification, just to test the service. Mystery shoppers, they called it, not to punish but to identify where there were still problems and offer additional training. Julian was tested on one of these occasions. He didn't know it was Sarah who was there, wearing a hat and sunglasses, pretending to look at cars. He approached with a genuine smile, not forced like before. "Good afternoon. Are you looking for something specific, or would you just like to see our models?" His voice was different. There was no condescension, no judgment, just a genuine interest in helping. Sarah watched as he showed the cars, explained features, and answered questions without rushing, with no signs of impatience. When she finally revealed who she was, Julian went pale for a second, but then smiled sadly. "Did I pass the test?" Sarah took off her glasses. "It's not about passing or failing, Julian. It's about being human, and today you were." He wiped his eyes quickly. "Every day I wake up thinking about that day, about what I did, what I said. I can't erase it, but I'm trying to make up for it with every new customer who walks in here." "That's all we can do," Sarah replied. "Learn and do better." The results began to appear gradually. In the first 2 months there was resistance. Some salesmen resigned, claiming they didn't agree with the new policies. Robert made it clear that the door was open for anyone who wanted to leave, but that the company's values were non-negotiable. But in the 3rd month, something changed. Complaints dropped drastically. Positive reviews on social media began to appear. Customers commented on the respectful service, about feeling welcome regardless of whether they bought anything or not. One customer wrote, "I walked into Elite Motors today just to look. I can't afford to buy right now, but I dream of one of them. I was treated as if I already owned the car. They explained everything with patience, let me sit in it, take photos. I left there feeling valued. When I can buy, it will be there." Sarah read that review aloud during a meeting with the team. "This here," she said, holding her phone, "is more valuable than any immediate sale. It's a customer who will return, who will recommend us, who will tell other people. Because you made her feel human." The transformation wasn't just external. Sarah was also changing on the inside. The initial conflict with Robert over having hidden the truth was gradually dissolving. She still felt a sting of hurt sometimes, but she began to understand his reasons in a deeper way. One night, after a long day at the dealership, they were in the apartment in Jamaica, preparing dinner together as they always did. Sarah was chopping vegetables while Robert seasoned the meat. "You know what I realized today?" she said without looking at him. "What?" "That we never stopped being who we always were. We just added layers. You didn't stop being the man who washes dishes with me at night. I didn't stop being the teacher who wakes up early to prepare lessons. We just expanded." Robert stopped what he was doing and looked at her. "Have you forgiven me?" Sarah put the knife down on the cutting board and turned to face him. "I am forgiving you. It's a process, not an event. But I'm getting there." He crossed the distance between them and hugged her. "Thank you for giving me this chance." "Thank you for showing me that I was always enough," she replied, resting her head on his chest. That night, for the first time in months, Sarah felt complete peace. The wound of humiliation hadn't disappeared, but it was turning into a scar. And scars, she was learning, were signs of healing, not weakness. In the 4th month after the acquisition, Elite Motors held a special event, an open house night for the community. It wasn't to sell, it was to connect. They brought in food trucks, live music, and games for children. Anyone could walk in, look at the cars, and ask questions without purchase pressure. Sarah saw entire families arriving, children running between the cars with shining eyes, adults touching the bodywork with reverence, just as she had done so many times as a child beside her father. Julian was there helping to organize, talking to people without any trace of his old arrogance. At one point, Sarah saw him kneeling beside a boy, explaining how the engine of one of the cars worked. The boy had wide eyes, fascinated. When the event ended and the last families left, the team gathered to clean up. Henry approached Sarah with an envelope in his hands. "What is this?" she asked. "A letter. I wrote to every person who complained about the service over the last 3 years. I apologized personally, explained the changes we made, and invited them to come back. I don't expect all of them to accept, but I had to try." Sarah felt her eyes mist over. "Henry, that's insufficient," he completed. "I know it's insufficient, but it's a start." "It's more than a start," Sarah corrected. "It's a man having the courage to face his mistakes and do things differently. That isn't a small thing." And it was there that night, surrounded by gleaming cars and people who were genuinely trying to change, that Sarah realized something fundamental. The transformation had never been about the dealership. It was about people, imperfect people, capable of making mistakes but also capable of growing, learning and becoming better. 6 months had passed since that Saturday that changed everything. New York continued its frantic routine. Fifth Avenue remained busy, and the mirrored buildings reflected the April afternoon sun. But for Sarah and Robert, everything was different now. On that Saturday morning, they woke up in the apartment in Jamaica as they always did on weekends. The alarm didn't go off because it didn't need to. Sarah prepared coffee while Robert tidied the living room, a routine as familiar as it was comforting. They now had a larger apartment on the Upper East Side, near the Harrison Holdings headquarters, but they had decided to keep the old one. They returned there on weekends to remember where they came from, who they were. "Today is the day," Robert said, pouring coffee for both. Sarah smiled. "I'm ready." They had planned this for weeks. A visit to Elite Motors, not as owners, not as the Harrisons, but as Sarah and Robert, the couple who one day walked into that store just to dream. Sarah chose her clothes with care. The same faded jeans she had worn on that first day, washed and ironed but still marked by time. The white cotton blouse that knew so many washes. The old sneakers she insisted on keeping because they were comfortable. Robert did the same. The navy blue polo shirt, the khaki pants, his hair slightly tousled by the wind. When they looked in the mirror, they saw the reflection of who they had always been. Simple, true, real. On the way to Fifth Avenue, by subway as they used to do, Sarah observed the people around her. Workers returning from their shifts, students with headphones, street vendors offering products in the stations, each person with their story, their struggles, their dreams, and each of them deserving of respect regardless of where they came from or where they were going. When they arrived in front of Elite Motors, Sarah felt a pang of emotion. She remembered the fear she felt pushing that door months ago, the innocent expectation of just looking at a car, the deep pain she carried when she left. Robert held her hand. "We don't have to do this if you don't want to." She squeezed his hand back. "I need to. I need to see with my own eyes that something has truly changed." They pushed the glass door together. The sound was the same, the marble floor reflected the same indirect light, the cars remained elegantly displayed. But something in the air was different. There was no longer that tension, that silent judgment floating between the pillars. A young saleswoman approached immediately. Sarah recognized her from the training sessions. It was Chloe, the young woman who had shared about being judged for her age. "Good morning, welcome," Chloe said with a genuine smile. "Can I help you with anything?" Sarah observed her eyes. There was no calculation, no evaluation of the clothes, the shoes, or the way of speaking. There was only a genuine interest in helping. "We're just looking, if it's no trouble," Sarah replied, deliberately using the same words she had said 6 months ago. "Of course it's no trouble," Chloe replied. "Feel free to explore. If you have any questions, I'll be over there at the reception. No pressure, no rush." She stepped away, leaving space for them to move freely. Sarah and Robert walked among the cars, touching the bodywork, looking at the interiors, doing exactly what they had come to do that first day. Dream. Other salesmen passed and greeted them with cordial nods, but no one approached them invasively. No one judged them by their appearance. No one made them feel like they didn't belong there. Julian was near one of the cars, assisting an elderly couple. Sarah watched the scene from afar. He was patient and attentive, answering each question with care. The couple wore simple clothes. They looked like middle-class retirees. But Julian treated them with the same respect he would give anyone. When he finished the service and turned around, he saw Sarah and Robert. For a brief second, his eyes widened with recognition, but he quickly recomposed himself and approached. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, what a surprise to see you here." Sarah smiled. "Today we're just Sarah and Robert. We're here as normal customers." Julian understood immediately. "Of course, can I show you a specific model?" "Actually," Robert said, "we'd like to see the silver sedan, the one we wanted to see the first time." Julian led them to the car, the same model Sarah had admired 6 months ago. He opened the door, invited them to sit, and explained features without haste, without condescension. He was a completely different salesman from the one who had looked down on them. When they finished looking at the car, Julian hesitated before speaking. "Can I say something?" "Of course," Sarah replied. "I look at you today and I see the same people who walked in here 6 months ago, but I am not the same person, And that's why I can truly see you now. Not by your clothes, not by your manner, but for who you are. People who came here with a simple dream and were treated with cruelty. He paused, his eyes shining. Thank you for not giving up on me, for giving me the chance to be better. Sarah felt tears rising. We didn't give up because we believe everyone deserves the opportunity to grow, including ourselves. Henry appeared from his office, now with the title of special consultant. When he saw Sarah and Robert, his face lit up. He approached with quick steps. What a joy to see you here. Did you come to see how things are going? We came to see if we could achieve what we couldn't the first time, Robert said. Look at a car in peace. Henry looked around at the team working, at the customers being treated with respect, at the environment he had helped transform. And did you achieve it? Sarah nodded. We did. And more than that, we managed to see that real change is possible. Do you know what else changed? Henry said, his voice loaded with emotion. Our sales increased by 30%. Online reviews are above 4 stars for the first time in years. But do you know what makes me most proud? It's that now when I go home at night, I can look in the mirror and recognize who I am. I'm back to being the mechanic who knew the value of treating everyone with dignity. The three stood there for a moment in silence, absorbing the meaning of it all. It wasn't just about a company that changed management. It was about people who chose to be better. Chloe approached timidly. Excuse me, but there's a customer here who would like to meet you. A woman of about 50 approached. She wore simple clothes and had calloused hands from hard work. When she spoke, there was emotion in her voice. You're the owners here now, aren't you? I read about the change in the papers. We are, Sarah confirmed. I came here a year ago, the woman continued. I had saved money for 5 years to put a down payment on a car. But when I walked in, a salesman looked at me and said I was in the wrong place, that I should try a cheaper store. I left here crying, feeling like the worst person in the world. She wiped a tear. Today I came back because I heard it had changed, and it really has. They treated me like a person. They explained options. They listened to me. They respected me. I'm not buying today. I'm still saving. But when I can, it will be here, because here I felt human. Sarah hugged the woman, who began to cry. I know exactly how you felt, because it happened to me too. The woman pulled back, surprised. To you? To me. In this very place 6 months ago. I left here destroyed, but I decided that instead of letting that pain define me, I was going to transform it into something greater. And here we are. The woman held Sarah's hands. Thank you. Thank you for making a difference. When the woman left, Sarah turned to Robert. See, that's what really matters. Not how much we sell, but how many people leave here feeling valued. Robert pulled her into a hug right there in the middle of the dealership. I love you. I always loved you. But today I admire you in a way that words can't describe. They stayed for another hour at the store, observing, talking to employees, and seeing customers being served with respect. Every interaction was proof that real change had happened. It wasn't perfect. There were still stumbles, but the intention was genuine. When they finally left, it was late afternoon. They walked down Fifth Avenue holding hands in silence, processing everything they had seen. You know what I realized? Sarah said, stopping in front of a store window. The transformation was never about elite motors. It was about us, about understanding that dignity doesn't come from the outside. It comes from within. That respect isn't something you ask for. It's something you demand. That self-worth doesn't depend on how much money you have or what clothes you're wearing. Robert nodded. And about having the courage to face the pain instead of running from it, to transform humiliation into change. Sarah looked at her own reflection in the window. She saw the woman she was 6 months ago in the same simple clothes, but she also saw something different in her eyes. She saw strength. She saw awareness. She saw someone who finally understood her own value. You know what else? She continued. I have forgiven you completely, for hiding who you were, for lying for years, because now I understand that you were protecting something precious, the chance to be loved for who you really are. Robert felt tears run down his face. I didn't expect to hear that today. I didn't expect to say it either, but it's true, and you know why? Because I realized that the man I met 7 years ago is the same one standing beside me now. The money didn't change you. It only revealed that you were always greater than your circumstances. They resumed their walk toward the subway station. They passed hurried executives, street vendors, students, and retirees, each person in their own world, each deserving of respect and dignity. When they entered the crowded subway, they found 2 seats together. They sat side by side, and Sarah rested her head on Robert's shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For showing me that I was always enough. For teaching me that dignity isn't bought, isn't worn, isn't driven. It's something we always had. We just didn't know it." That night, back at the apartment in Jamaica, they prepared dinner together as they always did. Rice, beans, steak, and salad, simple food made with love. They sat at the table they had bought at a used furniture store years ago and never thought of replacing. "Do you know what I want to do?" Sarah said between bites. "What?" "I want to create a program at Elite Motors for youth from underprivileged communities. Teach them about sales, service, mechanics. Give opportunities to those who normally wouldn't have them." Robert smiled. "You're already thinking big." "I always thought big, I just didn't know it." And it was at that moment, in that simple kitchen of an apartment that didn't need to be exchanged, eating food that didn't need to be sophisticated, beside the man who didn't need to be different from who he was, that Sarah finally understood the complete truth. The true transformation wasn't in having bought a company. It wasn't in having proven something to the people who humiliated her. It wasn't even in having changed the culture of a place. The true transformation was in having looked in the mirror and finally recognized her own value, in having understood that dignity was never and would never be defined by anything other than who she chose to be. And that night, while they washed the dishes together, laughing at inside jokes, planning the future, and simply being themselves, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she had everything she ever needed. Not because she had money now, not because people treated her differently, but because she finally treated herself with the respect she always deserved. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all. Dear listeners, we hope Sarah and Robert's story has touched your hearts deeply. If you were moved by this journey of transformation, of pain that became strength, of humiliation that turned into dignity, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Was it when Sarah cried on the sidewalk? When Robert revealed his secret? When Julian asked for forgiveness? Or when they returned dressed simply and were respected? Every day we bring intense stories like this that reveal the deepest side of the human soul, showing that real transformation is always possible and that dignity never depends on appearance. Your story matters too, and we want